Hey guys, today we're here with Willem from Botanix Labs. They're doing something quite interesting, a second layer on Bitcoin. We'll have him talk about that. It's slightly different from what you may normally think of as an L2 or a second layer. It's kind of a novel design. And so I'm happy to talk to him today. Willem, great to have you, and feel free to introduce yourself. And yeah, if you want to go into a little bit about, Botanix, then we can dig in more.
No, absolutely. So Willem, grew up in Belgium, live in New York now. Studied in Belgium, did cryptography there. Actually, funnily enough, Belgium is very big in the world of cryptography. Some very good cryptographers there. And 2.5 years ago, founded Botanix on the vision that I absolutely believe and want Bitcoin to be global money. And at the same time, I believe the EVM is the winning virtual machine. So I wanted to bring that to Bitcoin. Basically, huge amount of utility has been proven, has reached product market fit, and time to use Bitcoin as the money in those applications.
Okay, great. So you guys use something called a Spiderchain. Can you walk us through this? And just walk us through and tell us a little bit about how to think about this. It is probably for a lot of listeners not something that they've heard of or would recognize, like especially in comparison to some rollups and L2s elsewhere.
Absolutely. I think the one thing that is very important to understand about Spiderchains is decentralization. We absolutely believe in decentralization and sometimes refer to ourselves as decentralization maxis. I think sometimes we've lost that vision a little bit in Bitcoin. And so we wanted to bring the EVM to Bitcoin, but in a decentralized fashion. And so the Spiderchain actually enables that by basically going for a fully permissionless network where anyone will be able to join as a participant and verify the whole network. How it actually works under the hood is basically this decentralized network of multi-sigs. Often there's a bunch of different designs, but often it comes back to just multi-sigs. And so we're actually quite transparent in that, in our trust assumptions. And the idea is that you create a network of multi-sigs where anyone will be able to participate in.
Yeah, okay. So actually, a lot of Bitcoiners, like, especially in the past 8 years maybe, have known about Lightning, and Lightning is in itself sort of a graph of multi-sigs as well. Can you explain maybe a little bit how Botanix differs from that, and how you have the ability to add additional functionality with these kind of like validator set here?
The Lightning Network was originally designed as a pure peer-to-peer network, right? Anyone can participate. Now, over time, we've seen that it's actually mostly bigger companies that run the big Lightning nodes. And we came to that conclusion that basically you can accept that Bitcoin on the base layer is pure money, sovereign ownership for every person in the world. If you go to a second layer, it's probably okay that it's mostly going to be big companies actually running this infrastructure, because the infrastructure requirements go up. I believe the more you scale, and so that's one thing. The second thing is, if you want to secure a different VM, like an EVM, you basically need to add in a new consensus layer. You need all these nodes to agree on a global state. So you basically add in a proof of stake. Now, I used to be a very big proof of work maximalist, and I still am for the base layer. However, a proof of stake on a second layer is totally different. A lot of the downsides that you have for proof of stake on the layer 1, you don't have that on the layer 2. And so you inherit quite a bit of the proof of work from the base layer. And from a scaling perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Proof of work is basically your connection with the energy, with the real world. And then on the proof of stake, you basically leverage the best asset in the world, the most decentralized asset in the world, actually, which is Bitcoin. So how it differs with the Lightning Network, you basically accept that all the node operators are going to be bigger companies that can stake Bitcoin. And they all come to consensus on the global state of the EVM.
Yeah. Okay. So then, how do the validators actually work in terms of the proof of stake mechanism? A validator puts up some bond. Do you have a specific amount right now?
We are going to start without the bond, and so the slashing will be implemented later. But the idea is that the node operators will have to stake around 3 to 5 Bitcoin.
Okay. And how similar would you say the design of the actual proof of stake network is to something like Ethereum, the Ethereum proof of stake network?
It is a little bit similar, but not completely in essence. Like the cool thing about Ethereum is that you can actually scale the proof of stake to hundreds of thousands of nodes, which is actually quite cool. Now they only come to final consensus every 12 minutes, I believe, because you basically run into like real life problems that you need to sign off with a majority consensus across all these hundreds of thousands of nodes. So we will do something very similar in that. Now, in where it differs is that basically we can inherit Bitcoin's finality. So Bitcoin has probabilistic finality, which we will eventually inherit. A second big difference is the randomization function. A lot of people in the world know that coming up with a random number is incredibly hard. And it is probably the biggest attack factor for proof of stake. Like if you can game the randomization function, you can gain a lot of power. Now in Bitcoin, it's actually very funny. You have probably the most random number that's generated every 10 minutes, because what Bitcoin miners actually just do is they spend 10 minutes, a huge amount of energy to come up with a random number. And so we can leverage and inherit that security from Bitcoin's proof of work.
All right. So explain to me sort of like the security and trust assumptions in like the most plain language you can. So I deposit into Botanix. It's EVM compatible, so I can go and do, Uniswap or Aave or whatever, like similar applications. All right. What is like the degree of my security on Botanix? Like in terms of the trust assumptions and then exit capability, like talk to me as, I don't know, maybe not necessarily me, but a hardcore Bitcoiner here. How do you sort of convey the security assumptions of something like Botanix when maybe they're quite reluctant to take on some, high risk, like novel kind of design?
Absolutely. I think that's the most important question. So security assumptions, you have the initial, the launch period, and then the longer term vision. So in the beginning, we will start with an initial permission set of 15 members that will expand first to like 100 to 100. And so the trust assumption you make is that those 15 are basically more or less not collaborating in essence. Now, like I said, everything comes back down to a multi-sig. Now, I think what's important here, and when we take in very high value, is we will publish this set of initial 15. So Botanix will only have one. We will only run one node out of the 15. The other 14 are bigger companies, entities that have been around in the space, have familiarity with private keys, with running nodes, and they will be published. They will be spread out through 15 different jurisdictions to get that censorship resistance. And so what you trust is you look at this list and you say, like, do I trust this list or do I not trust this list?
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, and maybe this will help people understand better. Explain to me some of the differences between like a rollup, again, or an L2 also, and a Spiderchain, because this is like what I found, quite interesting. Like, there's a lot of teams currently, I mean, obviously on Ethereum, and then also on Bitcoin that are attempting to build rollups or build something that, if Bitcoin changes to a sufficient degree, could become functionally a rollup. Talk to me about the difference between maybe a Spiderchain and a rollup, and then I'll kind of dig in more.
I think they're absolutely going for different things. I think there's probably 4 big differences between rollups and what we're building with Spiderchains. And one of those differences comes back to the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum. I mean, in Bitcoin, it's a totally different land than in Ethereum. For a rollup, your last layer of defense is social consensus. And so a rollup runs a single node, is just actually a server that runs in an AWS server that runs in the backend somewhere. And if something goes wrong, you depend on the social consensus of the base layer to make up for that. Right? And that's the last layer of defense. Now in Ethereum, that is accepted and is aligned with that vision. Now, if we roll up on Bitcoin, something would happen. Bitcoin is never going to change. We know that. They're not going to come in to save the layer 2 roll up in essence. And so you don't have that social consensus on Bitcoin that you have on Ethereum. That's probably number one. I think second, what a lot of people underestimate is upgradability. When people say rollups are trust minimized or trustless, in essence, that is not really true. All of them have a multi-sig, and they have very good reasons to have a multi-sig. And the difference is actually often you don't even know who those people in the multi-sig are. There's very few teams who actually communicate that. They actually hide that, which in my mind is very, very risky. Now, why do you need that multi-sig is purely for upgradability. In essence, you cannot make any changes to your rollup once you implement it, except if you implement like the management keys. So everybody knows software engineering and coding can come with a lot of bugs. We even saw the Bitcoin bug, what was it, in 2017, 2018, that could inflate to infinity. And so if you cannot make any changes or upgrades to your code, that is extremely risky. And so in essence, in Ethereum land, everyone has this security council that basically allows you to upgrade the contract. Now, all the Ethereum sits in that smart contract on the base layer that you can upgrade, which is a very, very big risk factor. So the same thing will happen on Bitcoin and is happening, where you basically implement a security council that allows you to, steal all the Bitcoin and allows you to upgrade the network. It's because you don't have that social consensus and that consensus. The third big difference is decentralization. And that's where I believe the big difference is between the Spiderchain and rollups. And in Ethereum, it's becoming more and more accepted that rollups are actually not fit for DeFi. In Vitalik's latest blog, he basically put out what applications should you build on rollups and which applications should you build on Ethereum mainnet. And he basically says you have to put DeFi on Ethereum mainnet because it's the only one that is censorship resistant. Rollups are not censorship resistant, meaning that basically any government can basically censor you. And this is a big risk. It's one single server that is running in the backend somewhere. And so if the US government would subpoena that server, then, for example, then they can exclude another country from the financial system. They can exclude a certain amount of people from the financial system. And so you don't want that. You don't want a global financial system using Bitcoin as the money, where a single power has the possibility to censor a certain amount of people, a certain country, or anyone else, basically. And the fourth reason comes back to that as well. You have this thing called unilateral exit on Ethereum. You can basically force transactions on the base layer. Now, if you have a BitVM style setup where you have a big liquidity provider that basically does the bag-ins and the bag-outs, you no longer have that unilateral exit because you use basically atomic swaps to get on and off the chain. But overall, I think there's just an ideological difference in Bitcoin and rollups in Ethereum. In Bitcoin, we used to believe decentralization is by far the most important thing. Satoshi said it, you don't want to have a trusted party. And so what we're really building in that Bitcoin ethos, we want to be that we want to keep that decentralization with the Spiderchain. And so that's the more ideological difference between Spiderchains and rollups. It's, do you trust one single node, single server with multi-sig keys that you don't know about? Or do you trust a Spiderchain where you can basically see all the node operators and basically there's no censorship resistance that can come into play?
So like I've talked to the Alpin Labs guys, right? And part of the problem is that I'm not exactly sure. I haven't followed so closely as of late, but I'm not exactly sure where we are on BitVM versus BitVM 2 and the actual like practical functionality of it. My understanding is that the unilateral exit capability with BitVM 2 still comes down to a one of n, but it is feasible with a one of n trust assumption. Is that correct?
I have to check the exact implementations of their unilateral exit, but from what I understood is that the unilateral exit basically is for the liquidity operator.
Okay, yeah. So then, like either way, a user is not completely being able to trustlessly exit.
That's what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, interesting. I'll have to double check on that too, and I'm sure somebody will message me to clarify this because there's like quite a bit of talk around this as of late. Well, I want to ask then. I mean, how interested have you been in BitVM, BitVM two? Like, I feel from the other interviews I've heard you do, and from understanding Spiderchains to the extent that I do, Shinobi wrote an article on them, so I read that early on. It seems like you're taking kind of a pragmatic approach with what Bitcoin can do now. Is this like generally like your view, and not really making any assumptions about, you know, any upgrades, opcat, changing Bitcoin? Would you generally agree with that?
Yes, I generally agree with that. Like in all different aspects, we take a very pragmatic approach, even with the Spiderchains. And that's probably why we haven't pivoted to BitVM. I got drilled into me by my cryptography professor that complexity is the enemy of security. And so when you look at the whole setup, it is very, very, very complex. And so there's so many nitty-gritty details that can go wrong. And we probably haven't even scratched the surface of that. And so eventually, longer term, believing that that will fully, in a very user experience, fully secure way, comes to life without any bugs, I'm very skeptical on that. And even then, security-wise, if you make something that complex and you scale in different layers of trust assumptions, because you have the BitVM trust assumption, which is the optimistic trust assumption, then the ZK trust assumption, you basically scale those trust assumptions. And if you compare that to something more lightweight and very pragmatic like Spiderchains, it's a very big difference. And so that's why we didn't pivot to BitVM2. That said, absolutely applaud Robin Linus. Absolutely love the design. It's very very ingenious.
Okay, you're a cryptographer. What are your thoughts on ZK rollups? Yeah, ZK in general. Like, I mean, it's interesting, right? You come from a cryptography background and you're taking a very pragmatic approach. Like, what are your thoughts on, maybe you can also talk about Ethereum as well, whatever you want, but like, where is ZK headed? And it, like, you know, you jumped into this and with this Spiderchain vision. What was the rationale there versus doing something in ZK land?
Yeah. So I want to differentiate and separate the two concepts of ZK rollups and ZK itself. I'm a big proponent of ZK. I think ZK has a lot of applications, can do a lot of different things. And I've actually mentioned in a few chats, and people who are close to me know this, that at some point, if we have upgrades, if you have covenants, I'm quite sure you can implement the ZK proof in the Spiderchain and you can make it more trustless. And then you basically have the perfect combo of the decentralization of the Spiderchain, the censorship resistance of the Spiderchain, but the trustless of the ZK on the base chain. However, the rollup design is very different, because it's basically designed for a single node. If you only run a single node, you run into the problems of data availability, of the unilateral exit, and those are not the problems of the ZK. Those are problems of how the rollup is designed, and that basically comes back again. If you were building a rollup on Ethereum, you had to be faster than 12 seconds, and so they had to go towards the route of like a single node. And that's how eventually things happened in Ethereum. And I don't think we should do that in Bitcoin. I think properties like data availability, if you run a decentralized network with thousands of validators, that's your data availability. You can basically leave that on the second layer. You don't have to put that on the base layer. Bitcoin is not designed for that, right? Bitcoin is designed to be simple, best money, decentralized, and sovereign ownership of money. Bitcoin is designed as money. What we're designing with the Spiderchain is the infrastructure for a financial system, and it actually can run that. And so even unilateral exit, because we strayed away from that question a little bit. Unilateral exit, if you have hundreds of thousands of nodes, you basically inherit that unilateral exit from that decentralization from the second layer. And so to fully answer your question, big believer in ZK on its own. As an aspect, as a technology, and I'm quite sure we'll do something with that, with the Spiderchains. But it's vastly different of the whole rollup design.
The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ordinals Labs, who I've known for a few years now. They're one of the strongest teams I know in crypto. Ordinals Labs is a small engineering team with a flat structure. They build complex systems, primarily in Rust. For engineers who like challenges, here's the kind of problem they solve. A layer 2 blockchain needs to maintain 100 million accounts and generate a state root after each transaction batch. The root must be built within 50 milliseconds. How would you design the system to ensure the root construction is fast enough? High-performance challenges are core to Ellipsis Labs' mission as they build modern crypto finance. They believe finance needs more than an upgrade. It needs a complete rewrite. The success of their first product, Phoenix V1, speaks for itself, doing over $70 billion in organic trading volume. Now Ellipsis Labs is building Atlas, the blockchain purpose-built for verifiable finance. I like them because they're unique in this space. They have a long-term focus, they work in person from their New York City headquarters, and they're here to build products that fundamentally change the world of finance. If you want to learn more about their open roles, go to ellipsislabs.xyz/careers. How does Botanix deal with DA? It's just all stored locally, right? That's the node.
So basically, all the operators run the data on the second layer. You can of course run your RPC, and you can run like a validating node, so you can save all the data yourself as well. So that's permissionless. But there's no need for us to actually post all the different data back to the base layer because we are decentralized. That wouldn't make any sense. You only need to do that because you run a central single node. That's the only reason. And so what we do is we post back the root of the Merkle tree as a single source of truth back to Bitcoin. So in essence, some people would say, because everything is a rollup, that is basically makes us a rollup because we do post the data of the root of the Merkle tree back to Bitcoin.
Yeah. What do you think about the teams trying to put data on Bitcoin? Do you think this is feasible?
The designs I've seen, they basically come up with some very clever designs to actually put the data on Bitcoin. Now, I think the arguments are more on an economic argument. Do you want them to spam the Bitcoin-based layer? From the calculations I've seen, there's only possibility for 4 or 5 or maybe 3 rollups to post all their data back to Bitcoin, the base layer. But again, that is a result of running a single node. I think that's where all the design problems come from. Like the moment you started with, we need to be extremely fast at 1 second block times, that means you can only run a single node. That basically resulted in a huge amount of design problems.
Yeah. What do you think about using alt-DA? It's sort of a bizarre concept, but maybe some of these teams will ultimately use alt-DA. I mean, is this even... Yeah, sometimes I just come full circle. I'm like, what... It's almost bizarre, right? Because for example, alt-DA layers, something like Celestia. Okay, maybe it can provide tremendous utility. I'm not sure. There's a lot of smart people working on that, so I don't have any qualms about what they're doing. I guess I just look at this and I'm like, of course, if you want to run some data centers with the ability to yeet 1 gigabyte blocks in the future on these things, sure, you can do that. But hitting pinging these things with light nodes. We've known in Bitcoin for 10 years that Satoshi talked about SPVs, right? It's not exactly the same, but it's functionally very similar, right? The Merkle tip, right? What you were talking about. We've had these things for quite some time. It's not like some massive novel innovation. Sure, if you want to, put a ton of data in a box that's possible. What do you think then? Sorry, that's a bit of a ramble. What do you think then about just using alt-DA? Is this something that is even necessary when you're already kind of making some other trust assumptions?
I think alt-DA is very interesting, and I'm quite sure it will reach product market fit because there are probably some applications that need some separate data availability. The more and more, I also think that the whole AI and the creation of very cheap data will eventually result that most of the information out there will come at a cost and need to be put somewhere. So I think there's a very good use case for it. In terms of the differences between putting it on Bitcoin, the base chain, and an alt-DA, is I think you take an additional trust assumption. And so you basically layer in another dependency and another trust assumption. And it all depends on how decentralized that alt-DA is. Like I said, if we go with the Spiderchain towards thousands and hundreds of thousands of nodes, then that will probably trump any alt-DA solution that is out there today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about where you guys are at. Where is Botanix along its path of launching? I haven't followed so closely, so if you could just give us an update.
Absolutely. So where we are product-wise is we are feature complete in essence. So now the next 2 months will be basically pure internal testing, trying to hack ourselves, auditing, bunch of different approaches to auditing that we're all doing together. Like we really care about security and stability. I think that's utterly important. The basis is set up to basically grow the federation from there. So we have our initial 15 partners almost defined. I think we have a few spots left that we need to decide who exactly we want as a partner. We're all due diligence them. Basically, we want them to be spread out across 15 different jurisdictions. That's our initial federation. It's very important. Beyond that, we have a long list of, I think, 50 plus partners that want to come in after that. That's product-wise, fully set for mainnet in Q2. Actually, so that will happen. Finally, the launch. Business-wise, I think it's very interesting because now, for the first time ever, we are bringing a lot of the EVM applications to Bitcoin. I strongly believe every application in the world of crypto over the next 4 years will ask themselves, "What is my Bitcoin strategy?" And so they will all, in 4 years, I think all of them will come over to Bitcoin. Now, what we've been able to do is actually to bring the big ones over to Bitcoin for the first time. So we already made a few announcements. We've made the Chainlink announcement. We've did the Aave DAO proposal. So these are all public. These are the first times they come over to Bitcoin, which is absolutely massive. I think these are applications that every Bitcoiner wants to use. And so normally when we go to mainnet, we'll do a whole mainnet campaign, so a lot of things for everyone to try out. You'll be able to actually use the applications. The whole ecosystem will be there, and I think this is the first steps to actually run a financial system, bring applications back to Bitcoin.
Does Botanix use BTC as the gas token?
Correct. So we don't have a token. Fully runs on Bitcoin as a token, and
the validators just take a fee.
So this is super interesting because if you use Bitcoin as the gas fee and a transaction fee on the second layer, you suddenly create a new model, a model that hasn't existed yet. All those gas fees and transaction fees basically go back to the stakers. And so you'll be able to stake Bitcoin and actually get back transaction fees and gas fees, which are in Bitcoin. Now, again, this is a totally different model versus rollups. So rollups are a single node. They just get all the transaction fees. It's a perfect business model, and you can understand why there's a boom of rollups, because basically they're getting 100% of all the transaction fees. That's not the case with Spiderchains. Basically, you as a staker will be able to get the Bitcoin gas fees. And so we expect actual Bitcoin yields to exist, because suddenly you can stake Bitcoin and all the transaction fees on the second layer, all those gas fees in Bitcoin will accrue back to the stakers.
Yeah. Who do you view as your primary users? And if I had to put them in two categories, would you say Bitcoiners who have held Bitcoin and now want to use their Bitcoin, or people coming from other ecosystems and are already familiar with products like Aave and other EVM compatible applications?
The answer is both. I think on the Bitcoin side, there's a lot of Bitcoiners that have been Bitcoin only because of ideological reasons, like they don't want to sell their Bitcoin, buy Ethereum, and transact on Bitcoin. However, they do absolutely have demand for those applications. I mean, I've heard multiple stories of Bitcoiners, and this is all, of course, in private because nobody wants to say hit public. But if you want to buy a car or want to spend money or even buy an apartment, you want to kind of borrow stablecoins against your Bitcoin. The one thing as a Bitcoiner you don't want to do is sell it. So you basically borrow stablecoins against your Bitcoin. Today, how that looks like is you need to do it on Ethereum. You buy wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum, and then you go to an Aave, borrow stablecoins against your Bitcoin on an Aave. that is ideologically not very aligned with a lot of Bitcoiners. Now, if you can do that on a Bitcoin L2, that is a game changer. And so I think there's a lot of demand out there of people who want to stay on chain, who want to maybe swap their Bitcoin versus stablecoins back, who want to not sell their Bitcoin but borrow stablecoins against it, of people who want to get Bitcoin yield. I totally think that is a massive market, and a lot of Bitcoiners want to do these things. So that's the first category. The second category is more people on the non-Bitcoin side. Actually, I will say there's a lot of Bitcoiners actually active in Ethereum, in Solana, etc. All they want to do is make more Bitcoin. Now, if they can do that on top of a Bitcoin L2, where immediately you can withdraw from the L2 into your ledger if you had made more Bitcoin, maybe like longing or shorting on a perp, that makes way more sense. That's exactly what they want to do. Because eventually, if they make more money on an Ethereum L2, longing, shorting, playing around, trading, day trading, then eventually they want to funnel that back to their Bitcoin cold wallet. And so they will absolutely be active as well. And so I think the users will come actually from both different sides.
What will be the block times on Botanix?
We run on 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Is the fact that it is functionally decentralized with this, initial 15, but to be eventually larger validator set, are there any limitations in terms of applications you think you can service because of this, right? Like Hyperliquid is an extreme example where they started out as, strictly a perp DEX, and they had 4 validators, and it's like quite easy for validators, right? Like sort of in quotations, and they were able to like provide like extremely good UX. The more you decentralize, right? Like the more likely, the more difficult it becomes to provide, some types of applications. Where do you view Botanix like in this landscape?
I think you have the day one applications, which is basically 5 seconds is enough for anyone to do everything. And eventually you'll optimize. And so actually do think that's where rollups will eventually play a role as well. Like for some applications, you want 0.2 second blocks. You want those sub-second block times. And you don't really care that much about decentralization. And it's actually in Vitalik's same blog post, he basically makes a graph like, what do you need decentralization for and what don't you need decentralization for? And so for sovereign ownership, you want that to be decentralized. You have that on Bitcoin, you can hold your cold wallet. There's nothing more trustless and secure as holding your Bitcoin on the base layer. Now for DeFi, a global financial system, 5 seconds is more than enough. You want it to be decentralized. You want it to be censorship resistant. For NFTs, for buying coffee, for buying, doing a bunch of like polymarket trading, maybe you kind of want to have those fast sub-second transactions. And there's probably a plethora of applications that are going to be there. So censorship resistant is less important. And so you basically have a spectrum of applications where censorship resistance and decentralization is either extremely important or not important at all. Think about every transaction you do with money in the world and try to think, is decentralization for that important? And so I do believe you'll have applications that will suit themselves for very fast rollups. And then a global financial system, what we're really trying to build using Bitcoin as the money, 5 seconds is way more than enough.
How does the fee market work on Botanix? Is it like similar to congestion fees on, Ethereum or some of the rollups? Like how exactly is it structured now?
It's exactly the same. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And like, what do you expect? I mean, do you expect fees to be quite low? Honestly, I haven't really used many Bitcoin L2s thus far. L2s again, so I'm not so sure, but I'm just curious, like, do you expect fees to be like quite low and be able to, do you expect people to be able to do something like buy coffee? That's like the go-to example for Vitalik, but is that like sort of you're the model you're shooting for?
Absolutely. Like our transaction fees will probably be around 1 cent. Okay. We run at about the same throughput as an Arbitrum, for example. So okay. I think that for a long time that will be more than sufficient.
Yeah, got it. How easy is it? I mean, I assume it's like quite easy. Is it quite easy for EVM applications to port over? Like, are there any differences from Uniswap going from an OP stack to Arbitrum? Is there anything moving to Botanix that an EVM application would have to deal with that wouldn't be customary for just sort of like launching on, other L2s on Ethereum?
Nope, it's exactly the same. You copy paste the same smart contract code, and that's it. That said, I will say the actual reality is often different, because you often need infrastructure partners like RPC nodes, like subgraph providers, like oracles. Like a lot of these applications, for example, or the big ones, use Chainlink. So Chainlink there is quite important. And so as a standalone application, you often need to talk to a bunch of other different infrastructure partners to actually operate. And so you need that whole ecosystem to be there to actually start talking to each other. But all of them will be available. So
that makes sense. Slight non sequitur, but have you followed Bitcoin staking at all? I'm kind of curious your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I think we are one of the OGs that came up with Bitcoin staking. Like, I think.
Yeah, but this, like, your model is a bit different from, like, for example, Babylon, you know? So I'm curious, like, where do you see the differences there?
I think Bitcoin staking is super interesting. I think you need a two-sided marketplace for that. So Babylon has Bitcoin staking, but doesn't really use it to secure anything. And so what we're basically building is a fully two-sided marketplace. You can stake Bitcoin, but you also get the revenues. And so the revenues in Babylon, if you stake right now, are other tokens. The revenue for us is Bitcoin yield. And so you need two sides to be there to have actually a functional staking market. And I think with Babylon, one side of the game is missing. Now, I will say Babylon staking is very trustless. Like, in essence, it's a time lock. So I don't really have to give away custody of my Bitcoin. I put a time lock on my Bitcoin. And so the trust assumptions on Babylon are totally different and are probably better.
Is there actually slashing though?
I don't think that's implemented yet.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it is sort of different because like Babylon would just be this staking layer where rollups or L2s, whatever you want to call them, could then, pay for security. But yeah, it's like, it is, I think, quite different from what you're doing. I would say you're running more of like a network, a proper network. Well, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. I had one other question. Are like all EVM wallets compatible? I think you guys had a test net. Is that correct? I may have used it with MetaMask. Okay. Yeah. So are like all EVM wallets compatible then with Botanix?
Absolutely. Like, every single wallet works. There's absolutely nothing needed from our side even. That's probably one of the good things. And there's a lot of bad things about the EVM, and we can go into deep discussions on that. But that's probably one of the good things. Like, on our testnet, we've been live on our final testnet version. We've been live since December. And any wallet just works.
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
All right, now I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not trying to like pit you against competitors per se, but I want to hear where you think Botanix or the Spiderchain design fits amongst all these L2s. And so, I mean, I know the guys from Alpin, I know Orkin from Citrea, I know the Taproot Wizards guys, I know some of the people working on state chains now, or, modified state chains. How do you differentiate, right? Like, there's been this huge influx of Bitcoin L2s. A lot of them, it's not really clear that there's anything functionally similar to an L2. Then there are a number of teams that appear to be working on legitimate code and shipping something that is, trust minimized, secure, audited, right? There is a smaller subset of teams trying to build something real. How do you view Spiderchains fitting amongst ZK rollups and state chains and whatever the Taproot Wizards end up doing?
Yeah, I think the model is completely different, and I think we're very differentiated. We follow decentralization. As mentioned earlier, we are the only ones actually targeting a decentralization layer 2. And so the trust models are completely different. We're basically we believe in the decentralization, and we believe in the censorship resistance, and we believe countries and global financial system and companies are going to value that. And we actually already see that in the market. The market, like especially if you go outside of the US, is very, very afraid of basically the US subpoenaing or basically censoring or even claiming the assets. These are real possibilities. And so you cannot hide that. And what we're building with the Spiderchain is decentralized or going for decentralization. What rollups are going for is more fast speed applications. And so I think eventually that will play out. And probably it's compatible in essence.
Yeah. Do you expect the other? I'm not sure you would know, but I don't know personally. Do you expect these other L2s that are working on BitVM? Do you expect them to launch with a BitVM, or will it be more of a federated model? Because this is like my suspicion, but I don't know. Like, do you think that there's going to be a functional, like, pure BitVM 2 rollup in the near future?
I think all of them will have Security Council multi-sigs. Not doing that would be incredibly risky. Basically, the moment you have a single bug, the whole show is over. You can probably launch it, but it will have no adoption. It's the same thing as happened on Ethereum. Someone launched a ZK rollup, has like $400 in it, of course. And so the risk you take of launching without a multi-sig Security Council is insane. And so I don't think anyone wants to take that risk.
Are there upgrades or modifications to Bitcoin going forward that you're excited about, and would those help Spiderchains?
Absolutely. I think we take a very pragmatic approach. Like, we don't want to spend too much brain power trying to guess what is going to happen. Now we have looked in some designs. Quite sure with an opcat we can include a ZK proof in there. Even with CTV, possibilities might be there. CTV plus FS, which is becoming more popular. No, absolutely. Like the exact designs and possibilities. Each one of them, there's probably designs of the stack that we can make more easy and less complex.
Yeah, I saw you mentioned like CTV plus checks it from stack. It does seem to be getting like some traction, but again, this has happened in the past. So, building for future upgrades is like quite difficult and not something that, people who are trying to build a business should rely on. But do you feel any level of confidence about these? Like, do you feel any level of consensus being reached, or you just kind of following along like the rest of us?
I follow along. I think there's a lot of a core community that is very strongly in favor of governance, and we follow that along and we support that. However, I also see the pushbacks against it, like you're gambling with a $2 trillion asset. Now, not doing anything is also quite risky, and so I see both sides of the arguments. We are definitely in favor of governance, but we are following it on the sidelines.
Yeah, you had mentioned to me that you were, very, and I think a lot of people building on Bitcoin have articulated this as well. This idea that if we have some Bitcoin strategic reserve, if we have ETFs, if we have these massive buyers of Bitcoin, right, like it could become purely, digital gold versus and lose its ability to be used as a medium of exchange or actually transact and self-custodied. Do you feel like optimistic about our ability to change Bitcoin if necessary?
I feel optimistic that we can make changes if necessary. And I do agree we are at massive crossroads, actually. I think in Bitcoin right now, there's two ways this can play out over the next 10 years. Either more and more Bitcoin will go towards ETFs. And we saw even a lot of people on Twitter tweeting about it. It's like, I'm going to actually move all my Bitcoin from self-custody to an ETF because, it has access to the traditional financial system and you don't have the custody risks, right? So that is a very interesting risk that not enough people are talking about. What if 5 years from now, there's 10 million Bitcoin in ETFs? And strategic Bitcoin reserves and company treasurers, then basically it will function as digital gold. And that's it. I mean, we already have gold today and countries still print money. So this whole experiment and ideology then basically has failed. And so the one way we are trying to counter that is creating actual on-chain demand. Like if people have actual reasons and use cases and utility to use their Bitcoin on chain to have that self-custody, that is a total game changer. And so that will actually counter the flow, and people will take the Bitcoin from their ETFs, because now you can actually use that on chain in a bunch of applications and utility. And that's basically what we're trying to do. Like if you actually think about it, there's very little utility on Bitcoin. Today, you can hold it in your self-custody, you hold it in your own wallet. And that is by far the most important use case, but it comes with trade-offs. And for a lot of people, they don't want to manage their own private keys. And I'm thinking about the average person in the world. That is still a learning curve that they have to go through. But what will drive them through that exercise of actually understanding what private keys are, understanding what brings them on chain, that is demand. That is user demand. And so we absolutely want to bring utility and applications to Bitcoin so people can use that and can eventually learn how to self-custody on Bitcoin, the base layer. Like in essence, what has been happening, and I think that's super interesting, is you have Tether with stablecoins. There's a lot of pushback from Bitcoiners against stablecoins, but you have 3 billion people in the world that are unbanked today. And Tether is onboarding more than anyone else to private keys, to self-ownership. Okay, it's stablecoins on Ethereum, but what if you bring that to Bitcoin? And I think stablecoins should be a funnel into Bitcoin. Then you suddenly learn those people to manage their own private keys, manage those stablecoins, and eventually they'll understand the importance of Bitcoin and self-custodying that on Bitcoin itself. And so I do hope we go the second route of actually making Bitcoin global money and not just digital gold.
Yes, I agree. I had one other question that I forgot to ask you about. Ordinals and Runes, can those be ported into Botanix, or in the future, could they be?
They can absolutely be natively. However, we haven't pursued that because there's a bunch of different protocols and we don't know which one is the winning. Is it Taproot Assets? Is it Runes? Is it BRC20s? But you can do it with a centralized bridge. Basically, there's a bunch of bridge providers already out there today that bridge your Ordinals and Runes to Solana or BNB chain, I think, and Ethereum.
I think that like Odin Fund or Ordin Fund, I forget what it's called, but I think they're actually like using ICP apparently. Which is kind of interesting. It's like the first time I heard that name in a long time. So yeah, I guess it is like feasible like that. I was just curious. But yeah, that makes sense if you haven't focused too much, because it's hard to know what to focus on.
But technologically wise, we've already spec'd it out. It's perfectly possible for example, all the Spiderchain nodes also to run the Taproot Asset protocol. It's very similar to how Lightning basically works. Suddenly you basically ask all of the different Lightning nodes to also run the Taproot Assets protocol. And so it's technologically very, very possible. Now, do you really want your Spiderchain nodes to run both Ordinals and BRC20s and Taproot Assets? I don't think so. Again, complexity is really the death here. And so making it as simple and lightweight as possible is the game changer here. And so users will be able to bridge it with centralized bridges, but not in the protocol yet.
That makes sense. Okay, well, awesome. I thought it was fantastic. When did you say you guys will be launching mainnet, or is there an exact date or just a relative time frame?
We have internally an exact date that we're working towards, but it's Q2.
Okay, awesome. And where can people find you? On Twitter, and then also the Botanix website if you have that?
Absolutely. Twitter, Botanix website, and for the Discord people, we have quite an active Discord, so definitely join. And for the Bitcoiners out there, use your Bitcoin. We need it. We need to transition that from digital gold into a medium of exchange.